I want to go over the reason that I brought up this topic um, is because it's very personal to me. Like this is something that that I have had to really learn and understand and be able to start to overcome for myself. And so my goal has always been, how can I help other people? How can I help other people get further in their journey faster based on the slow, decades long slog that I did to figure it out for myself? Not saying that I didn't have a lot of great teachers and mentors, um, but I think having that ability to look back and see how that went and and be able to share the parts of my journey that I think can help others. That's my only goal. So I'm going to start off telling a few stories. Now, kids that grow up in homes with addiction or mental health issues, they learn to read the room to be able to survive, right? The whole idea of the empath, I believe, is it can be twofold. This is just my hypothesis, is that you can come into this world being more open and empathetic, and or it can be shaped by your environment. Regardless, I believe that when you grow up in chaos, in a dysregulated environment, you are way, way, way more likely to become what the term empath or highly empathic. And everyone has, well, unless, so funny, unless maybe you're a sociopath, everybody has the ability to be highly empathic. But growing up in kind of that prime environment where you have to be as a child, that is a skill that you have to really flesh out and develop. That pressure cooker situation is going to develop that at the time when your brain is forming the most. So that is really going to give you a really deep understanding and have that become part of your identity and your psyche. So for me, I don't know. I don't know if I came into this world in that way or if it was just the environment that I was in. There's no way for me to know. I do know that my mother was highly emotionally dysregulated. I don't have very many memories of when I lived with her because my grandmother got legal custody of me when I was about 2.5 years old, with the idea that when my mother, got on her feet, that then my grandmother would give me back to her. And so I have a memory. And by going back with the dates and knowing what was happening at what time, I had to be maybe around 3. And I had been staying with my grandmother for a while at that point. I remember that there was continuity and security with my grandmother. Now, my grandmother she was a very dedicated caretaker. She wasn't the warmest. Um, and my mother was all feeling and emotion. So my mother showed up with her fiance and they wanted to take me back to where they were living. And I was in the room, and I remember there was a lot of heated discussion going on. And my grandmother was feeling very unsure, and my mother was, again, always highly emotional. And at one point, I think it was my grandmother that decided this was a good idea. But at one point, she said, "Well, let's ask Chrissy what she wants." And all eyes turned to me. And I remember in that moment, I could feel everyone's emotions. I felt my grandmother's fear for me and her dedication and her wanting me to stay with her because she didn't know what was going to happen. And I felt my mother's need. My mother felt like a need for a win, for a validation. Um, but it still felt dangerous in some way. And I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And I was holding everyone's feelings. And all I remember was just talk about going over threshold. I just got up and ran. I ran out of the house. My uncle and aunt lived next door. I ran next door into their house, down into their basement, and I hid. And when they finally found me, uh, I think my mother had been gone. I think she had left. That's my first memory of that experience of so deeply feeling everybody's own emotional state and feeling responsible for it. How that developed over time. I mostly didn't live with my mom, but I did off and on, for summers and things like that. And my mother was also an alcoholic. So she was borderline personality disorder, high level, high level. So just to give a little information about that without going too far into that yet. With borderline personality disorder, one of the key factors is there's a reduced ability for compassion for others. In other words, typically the person is very, very in tune with their own feelings around everything happening, but they have a really hard time having empathy and compassion for others and being able to put themselves in other people's shoes of what things might feel like for them. And so, how much you might be on that borderline scale, like there's a scale, like somebody might be light in that way where they can still kind of do that. And others might border on sociopathic, where like they have a very, very low ability to have compassion for others. So my mother was probably a pretty high borderline based on her actions. So she was also an alcoholic, and that's like throwing gasoline on a fire. And I used to say that I would watch my mother's personality change from the minute her hand wrapped around a drink for the first time, before it even hit her lips. It's like this weird, like darkness would come down into her eyes and over her face. Um, so I learned when I was around, and then I did go and live with her when I was 15. So I definitely learned how to anticipate what was coming, and you never really knew what was coming. Sometimes when she drank, she would just cry and always leaning on her kids emotionally. Other times she would make threats, other times she would be violent. You never knew. So that ability, though, to anticipate, to then become the kind of grounding force in the hopes that it will calm someone who is dysregulated, that became my MO. And that has served me well in some ways, but it has also not served me well in others. And that's what I want to talk about today. One of the ways it has served me well, I have another story where my ex and I had been going to meet up with family, some members of my family that we had gotten into a business with. And he was very angry about some of the ways that that business had been conducted. And when we pulled into the parking lot of where we were meeting, he pulled a gun out from under his seat and stared at it. And I had no idea that that was there. And I remember my whole being switching into this kind of management mode of him tapping right into his. I already knew what his emotional state was on the way there, but I had no idea how far it went. And so now I am operating, and this is what I'm describing what it felt like at the time. He ultimately put the gun back under the seat before we went in. So my whole goal was to be like this grounding rod for his energy, to make sure that the energy, at least I was absorbing the energy. I was going to be the thing that absorbed the energy so that it didn't get into a huge chaos mode. And I knew that something was going to happen. I knew that this wasn't going to go well, but I also knew how badly it could go. And so switching into that role of I have to be the calming factor between his energy of anger and wanting to retaliate and their energy of most likely freaking out and being afraid of him. Almost like not wanting to trigger a prey drive in an animal because then they may lose all of the things that may be holding them back. And what's funny about that is that some of the people in that room thought that I was aligned with him, that I was okay with what was happening because of how calm I was, how like disconnected I was from what was happening. They had no idea what was, whether I was doing this or not, but that was my intention. So the problem with having these skills is that they serve us really well as children to be able to survive our environment. That brilliant adaptive child, as Terry Real calls it, they learn to survive. And these things are beautiful. I mean, it shows the adaptability of the human mind and spirit, but it doesn't just suddenly transform when we grow up. And when you have a skill like this, unconsciously, you look for environments and ways in which to use that skill because that feels comfortable. And though we wouldn't choose those intentionally, that's what can happen. So when we grow up in these dysregulated environments, when we grow up in dysregulated environments, empathy is not a personality trait, it's a survival skill. And you develop hyper awareness of other people's emotions. You start to ignore your own needs. You become the emotional caretaker for the people around you. And you start being hyper vigilant, scanning the environment for potential problems that could come down the road and trying to prevent them before they happen. So, empathy create empathy holds a lot of gifts too. When you have become highly empathic from this environment, you can be deeply compassionate, a great listener, emotionally intuitive. You're more inclined to be someone who goes into the healing arts, be a helper in some way, a leader, a coach. You're able to sense unspoken feelings in people, and you're highly loyal and loving. In fact, many of the most beautiful people that I've ever met grew up in this kind of chaos. Where it can become hard as adults, it can also be paired with having more anxiety, having an over sense of responsibility for other people's feelings. You have difficulty resting or relaxing because you're hypervigilant. You have trouble knowing what, they want, they being anyone else, because you feel like you always have to be reading between the lines. You fear conflict to such a degree that everything that doesn't feel like it's got a wide open road, landing strip, everything feels like it's confrontation. So to explain to somebody something, your expectations or something that might be bothering you, or even like something as simple as needing to change a plan that you made with someone can feel like really dangerous, like that could blow up. Who do you think you are? And because we've been taught that everything doesn't always follow the clear pattern of what we're saying. So what we're saying is not always taken in the way that it is intended. And then we can also feel guilty for having needs. I mean, sometimes that's part of the childhood dynamic is you are meant to be there to care for or support the adult. You're parentified in a way. There's a lot of different ways that an emotionally dysregulated caretaker can lean on a child emotionally. They can make them their pseudo partner, even if they are still married to the other parent, uh, where there's no boundaries between telling the child like very adult feelings or situations that the parent is going through and making them kind of their own therapist or best friend. And this is where codependency often shows up. And codependency isn't weakness, it's just another survival adaptation. And so some of the common traits, some of the common emotional traits of codependency are, again, feeling responsible for other people's happiness. In other words, like I've seen people so stuck on making a decision because they're so afraid that if they make a decision, like where to go for dinner or where to take the family for vacation, they're so afraid that someone might not be happy or something might go wrong that they are completely unable to make a decision. There can be a strong, strong sense of guilt when setting any boundaries because boundaries feel selfish. You're supposed to be there to serve others. That's how you show love, right? You show love by being completely boundaryless. I am here for you, 1,000%. The fear of disappointing people. Disappointing people, I often say, feeling like someone else is upset with us feels like this terrible pressure. And it's ever present. And we don't feel safe until we find a way to neutralize it. And sometimes what people do is they apologize for things, for situations where they did absolutely nothing wrong, but the other person was angry at them. And so, in order to get past it and bring the peace back, they'll apologize. They'll say yes to things that they don't want to do because they want to keep the peace. So, fear of disappointing people is big. Um, Again, that feeling of being selfish if you take care of yourself. And what I see people do in there is that they swing wildly between being boundaryless, where they give themselves away, then they build up resentment for that. And then they try to set boundaries where suddenly now they blame everyone for not taking care of themselves, for them not taking care of themselves, and then use self-care as a kind of weapon against people, like from anger or frustration. And then they'll swing back the other way because they'll feel guilty about that time that they did that. And they'll swing back into being boundaryless and focusing on the needs of everybody else. And so, what we really want is to have that balance within us and not be so focused on others and what they judge or think about us and what we do, but how do I feel about it? Because how I feel about it is actually going to go a long way in informing how other people feel about it. Because a lot of times they're taking the cue from us. So if we're like not, we're, if we're behaving in a way that's like, I feel really guilty for doing this thing, they're picking up on our feeling. And then they can use that as proof that what we're doing is selfish, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So, relationship patterns. We end up being attracted to people who need fixing or rescuing. I like to say we really love that diamond in the rough. You know, that person that on the outside, they look like they have so much going for them. But also we can kind of feel intuitively the things that maybe they don't feel loved enough or they have low self-esteem. And if we could just, be the wind beneath their wings, if we could just love them enough and be there for them all the time, all these skills that we have, they could really flourish and be this amazing partner or best friend or business partner. That rarely works out that way. So we stay too long in unhealthy relationships because loyalty is really important to us. So we become very manipulatable through the idea of loyalty. We become overgivers and under receivers. A good friend of mine, sometimes it's easier to understand things when they're really oversimplified, but she would say, the takers will always find the givers. And we like to give. So initially, it's a win-win. I get to give, you're grateful for receiving, and this feels really good until the giving is no longer done organically. It's now not only expected, but demanded. So now we've taught people how to treat us. We've told them that this is the MO. So we're the only ones that can reset this. And I just want to tell you a quick story about the same friend. You might have heard me talk about her. Her name's Donna. She's like one of my biggest mentors in life. And she had two divorces before she met her current husband of like 30 years. And in the beginning, it started off amazing, this new relationship, and everything was great. And then, I don't know, maybe a year or so in, she started to see that all of the same ways that her other relationships had fallen apart were starting to show up in this relationship. And she sat down and she said, the only common denominator here is me. So what am I doing that is creating this? And she realized that doing for others, cooking their favorite foods, being boundaryless, showing up for them was how she showed love. But then they started to just expect it. And then when they started to expect it and demand it, then she became resentful. And this whole cycle started. So she sat her husband down at the time. And if you know her husband, it's kind of funny because I can totally see him being like, what's this about? Another talk? So she sat him down and she said, listen, this is not working for me, but the issue is me. And I realize that the issue is me. And so I am going to have to start taking care of my needs, me taking care of them, not you, not anybody else. I'm going to start taking care of my needs. And I just wanted you to know that because I'm doing this for both of us to save this relationship because this is not a pattern that is sustainable. And of course, he maybe didn't really understand what that looked like. So he even said to her, he's like, well, what does that look like? And she said, I don't know. I've never done it. And I thought that was the best, most honest answer anyone could give. I don't know what this looks like. I haven't done it. But I will tell you that 30 years later, they're still married. So clearly, that was what needed to happen for them to have a real healthy relationship. So the overgiving and under receiving being a part of a codependent relationship pattern is important to understand. We also tend to confuse love with sacrifice. And we will tolerate poor treatment in order to keep connection. Because we believe, again, if we have boundaries, that that is a sign that we don't care, right? Or we're not fully invested. Some of the behavioral patterns are saying yes when you mean no. Gosh, I mean, how many of us do that? That's like that's a hard one. But the good thing about that one is it's also usually the clearest one. So it's a good place to start when you start shifting some of this stuff. Avoiding conflict at all costs. I have a client who would bring she's from originally from Europe and has lived here in the States for decades. And she would bring her mother over for months at a time. And it would drive her mad because, all the things we're talking about, she felt responsible for her mother having a good time every day. Can you imagine? Like every day feeling responsible that your mother, who doesn't speak the language and has so many things, extra needs, um, feeling like her mother has to have a good time, feeling responsible for her, resenting that, all of the dynamic between her and her mother, which also wasn't all that great. So we talked about, well, why do you have her come for 3 months? That's a really long time to be responsible for somebody else. Why don't you knock that down? And she was terrified. She had all these stories that her mother, ultimately the fear is that they won't love me anymore. I mean, that really, when you get down underneath it all, is that that person will leave me just for something as simple as this. And we had to work on it, worked on it, worked on it, worked on it until she finally built up, or as I say, she suffered enough to finally make a different decision. But finally she said to her mother, why don't we do 6 weeks next time? And her mother was like, yeah, sure, okay. All the stories she had in her head, how her mother was going to be like, who do you think you are? And you don't love me. And why? What's wrong with you? Or any of the things that she thought, it didn't exist. But we believe from our childhood experience that we will be guilted and shamed about having needs or having an opinion or having any kind of boundary around anything. We also tend to over explain ourselves. I call this when we have to bring our basket of evidence, right? Or our basket of proof or our validation. Our word or our need can't be enough. We have to have more to it than that. We tend to try to manage other people's emotions. I think that one might be kind of self-explanatory. And we tend to feel drained by a lot of this stuff, but we just continue doing it because often we don't even really know that this is not us, right? This is not our personality. These are learned traits. So, so here's another. Does anybody have, by the way, does anybody have any questions at this point or anything that they want to share? I just want to make sure that if you do, if you, at any point, you can just pop it in the chat and we can explore it. Okay, super resonating. Thanks, Dallas. So here's how it can affect the nervous system. So love becomes being needed. Being needed is very different than being wanted. It feels way more comfortable if we can actually see tangibly how we benefit this person in their life rather than just this idea that they love us just for being us, like that we are actually lovable without having to do anything to deserve it. So love becomes being needed. Safety is in our ability to keep other people regulated and calm. And connection is achieved through our self sacrifice. So look at all I'm doing for you. Do you love me now? Look at all I'm doing for you. We want to do for people. We want to be needed and in a big way, because if we don't feel like we're enough to be loved, then at least we can fall back on being needed. And will that means that we'll less likely be abandoned. So as adults, now calm can feel boring. Healthy relationships feel unfamiliar. And if you know anything about the subconscious, the unknown is the number one fear of the subconscious. So a healthy relationship is actually the unknown. We don't like, we've not experienced that. We may have seen it on TV or in movies, or even could have friends that had healthy relationships, but we've not experienced that in our body, in our neural pathways. So it's still the unknown. Drama can feel like love. Passion can feel like passion, right? Drama, it's familiar. And so peace can feel unsafe at first. So I want to reframe a few things for you, right? This is for you to understand about yourself. Instead of thinking, I'm too sensitive, right? My nervous system learned to be incredibly attuned. And instead of feeling negative about seeing codependent behaviors in yourself, think about these patterns at one time kept me safe. I've always joked that, I'm a card carrying codependent. And the reason that I make that joke is because so often when we have shame about what is true, then we are more interested in defending ourselves than making real change. And when you embrace the truth, when you embrace everything, then you can move forward. And it takes you out of that mindset of being in everybody else's minds and nervous system and worrying about what everybody else thinks about you. When you own everything, then nobody can hurt you unless you choose to let them hurt you. If someone came to me and said, you're codependent, and tried to use that as a way to shame me, it couldn't be done. Like, I know I am. And my work in this lifetime is being aware of that, challenging it, making sure that I am not acting from that program as much as possible, but also knowing that this was something that went into my basic operating system as a child. So to think that I'm just going to get to a place where it's just gone, just completely gone, did that, check that box, is probably never going to happen. It's the bringing it into the light and understanding it in my conscious mind of what is happening unconsciously allows me to make better decisions for me and all of my relationships. Okay. So I have a lot to share, and I don't know. This might have to have a part two because I think I'm like a quarter of a way through, maybe. I just want to check the comments real fast. So Jane said, "You're describing me so well." Tina said, "Wow, so much I can relate to, and also a family member who is going through a very difficult time." I'll share this with her. Yeah, please share it. There will be a recording. Um, Jackie said, I had to shut down my sensitivity as has always been deemed a failing. So now I have issues with receiving and being open, even when I really want to. Yeah, I totally get that. And that's part of why I'm sharing this because I want to give people a different framework so that they recognize this as both. See, I know I keep cutting. So they recognize this as both a gift and a challenge. So when everything is a two-sided coin, right? There's the good aspects and the challenging aspects. And that's what we're going to go through, or we are going through in this today, because understanding that will help you manage it much better and feel way more in control and confident and grounded in your abilities to be empathic and not have it carry you away. So, healing in these areas involves learning to feel your own feelings, not just others, creating boundaries without guilt. Here's a big one: understanding that you are not responsible for other people's emotions. Letting go of the fixing, rescuing dynamic, and learning safety and calm and stability. Empathy is a gift. Codependence is what grows out of that chaos. But healing is learning to use your empathy with boundaries and self respect. I'm passionate about this topic because these systems we inherit and they can run our lives in the shadows, blocking us from our full potential. But what exists in the dark cannot survive the light. And that's why this is so important, because everything, all of the basic things that we want in life, loving, healthy relationships, creating abundance in the areas of our life that matter to us, feeling connected to our lives, feeling that we're in the moment and able to feel joy and feel pain and feel the whole range of human emotions without judging them. All of those things exist on the other side of doing our own work. So here are some of the pitfalls. First, I want to look at, there was one message. So Dallas said, this is so helpful because I've been trying to dig deeper on why seeing horse suffering can be so painful for myself and clients. Yes, yes. That is, you know, that's a big one. And where I live, I can see the horses right next to me because we're all right next to each other. And we have to understand where we have power and where we don't. And knowing that is really important. So if you look at horse suffering, Sometimes there are situations where you can do something that would be effective to help a horse. And in those times, you want to do those. We do those things, right? Most of the time, I would say, we don't. And suffering is a huge topic, right? Human suffering, child suffering, animal suffering. And so we have to recognize that this is bigger than us. So we do things and we create boundaries around ourselves that protect our energy from being drained by things that we cannot control. Because if we let our good energy get drained in things that we have no ability to affect, then what we are meant to bring into the world, our gifts, lessen. So it's kind of a responsibility to be able to learn how to do that. It's kind of like putting blinders on. You have to be able to go, not my business. I cannot. Focus on what you do have control over, what you can affect. All right. So pitfall number one around being empathic is that empaths often believe their intuition is 100% accurate. Because once it kept them safe. And the truth is a lot of times they are accurate, but we start to tend to believe that what we think and feel is always 100% accurate. And we have to understand that it's going through our filter, right? We have a certain set of experiences, of processes, of ways of seeing the world that we may get a feeling or a hit, but it's going through our filter. And so you can't know what you don't know. And though the feeling might be correct, the story behind the feeling may be incorrect. And that can make the whole thing have a completely different meaning. So we can misread neutral moods as being there's something wrong. We can assume people are upset with us when they might just be tired. We can assign meaning to things where none exist. It's that hypervigilance stepping in. Let me ask you this. Have you ever read a text message from someone and immediately like blown up about it internally, been like, what the hell is this person saying? Or how could they say that to me? Or this is crazy making, like just totally in your nervous system, freaking out about a text. And you don't respond right away, maybe because you can't or because you need to I got to calm down before I respond to this. But some time goes by, and then you go back to that text and you're going to reread it before you respond. But now you reread it and you realize you missed a key word or something. And suddenly it didn't mean anything that you thought it meant in the beginning. Like what you read before just is not there. And we do this in real time, but we don't have the benefit of being able to revisit like with a text message because our nervous system is hyper vigilant. So as soon as something in that text triggered our nervous system, our cognitive brain starts to shut down. The blood starts pulling away from that part and going right into the nervous system. So everything we read after that like we can't trust it, believe me, because it's all feeding the initial fear. So empathy gives us information, but our past trauma can turn it into interpretation. So that hypervigilance, that old survival wiring, fear filling in the blanks, we have to be aware that we're predisposed to that. So that can lead to overthinking or jumping to conclusions, emotional reactions based on assumptions or based on that feeling that I trust my intuition over your explanation. And that is really a very dangerous place to enter because we start believing our own stories. And, Dr. Joseph Spencer says this all the time. Just because you feel something doesn't mean it's true. And when we stop being able to take in information from other people when they try to clarify, or then what we're in essence saying is, you don't get to tell me what you think and feel. I get to decide what you think and feel. And it completely disempowers the other person. And it's a warped view because if you can't allow someone else to explain and take in that information, look, I want to be clear here. If you think a person is lying, or there's other aspects about it, or you've caught them lying, or then that is something that is different than this. Okay. Because you would stick to the actual facts of what was happening over just your feeling. And you can have a feeling, but if you don't have any facts to support it, your feeling may not be true. So you can note your feeling, file it away like, not sure that this is right, but I'm going to wait and see. Does this make sense? Obviously, there's a lot, I'm teaching this, but there's a lot of so many different situations that people can be in. I can't address every single one, but in general, this is one of the biggest blocks to having intimacy in relationships and having clear communication because we want other people to take our words seriously when we explain to people, oh no, I didn't mean it that way, or let me tell you what I'm thinking. We don't want them to say, nah, I believe my own story about you and I don't want to talk to you. And that's not true. So look, I'm sure we've all done that. I'm sure we've all done this at some point, but it's about recognizing it, right? So here's pitfall number two. So what we're talking about, mind reading, it goes both ways. Because empathetic, codependent kids had to read others to survive. So they grow up believing something else. I have this skill, right? I can read your emotional state and I'm so tuned into you. So if you love me, you should just know what I need. You should be able to read my mind. We believe the way we show up in relationships is what love looks like. And so if our partner doesn't have that same skill of like being able to really read the room and intuitively know what we love or don't like, because that one time, 10 years ago where I said I didn't like raisins and how could you buy raisinets at the movie theater? Don't you remember that I don't like raisins? We gather this and we use it to demonstrate to ourselves that if that other person isn't reading my mind, then how connected are we? How much do they really love and care about me if they don't know what I want or anticipate my needs? What we don't see is that what we don't do to build connection is we tend to not communicate directly. We don't express our needs because we feel like I shouldn't have to. You should know. And so we have to start asking and sharing what we think and feel. And that feels very dangerous because that could have been used against us in the past. We have to start letting go of these silent expectations, especially if we didn't communicate them. Yes, vulnerability. We have to be willing to be vulnerable. And again, this comes back to the idea that we have to live in our truth, which is if some of these things are parts of our operating system, then we just own them. We have to face the parts of us that might feel shame around them or try to hide them from others. We own them. Uh, I'm going to, I want to give this analogy. I've used it before, so bear with me if you've heard it before. But if any of you have seen the movie 8 Mile uh, with Eminem, and if you haven't, I'll give you the setup. So the setup is Eminem is a white kid who grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood who loved rap music and was really good at it and wanted to make a career as a rapper. So he would go to these rap offs, and in a rap off, the whole idea is you want to go last, you don't want to go first because you kind of rap to make fun of the other person. So anything you say can and will be used against you, right? So you want to be able to go last, but if you're a challenger, you go first. So what he did was obviously there was so much that could be made fun of him. So he ended up going out on the stage and owning every single thing about himself. He didn't say anything about the other guy. He owned, white trash from the trailer park, you know, mom's this, mom's like the everything, everything. And the crowd loved it. And when it came time for the other guy, he had nothing. He had nothing because he was bulletproof because there was nothing to defend. He owned everything and he ended up winning. So the idea is owning your shit is a superpower. Owning your shit is a superpower because it keeps you congruent in your own mind and actions, and it makes you less vulnerable to any attack from someone else. Because if someone says, well, you've lied to me in the past, like, yeah, I know. And I'm sorry about that. I did. We don't do that. We go, oh, yeah, but what about the time that you lied? Or what about the time that you left me and didn't pick me up from the movies and I had to walk home? Like we don't, we don't stay in the truth and own our shit. And we make it into a vulnerability that we have to defend. And then guess what? That breaks down connection. And we drain a lot of energy that could go into a lot of better places defending and being afraid of having to defend and being afraid of people seeing vulnerabilities in us. Okay. Any questions? So, pitfall number 3, the covert contract. All right. This is a huge codependent calling card, which is the covert contract, because this is when you do something for someone, but you have an unspoken expectation of something that you want in return. And often you're not even aware that you have created this expectation because we're always creating expectations in our mind. Like if I was going to go to Starbucks on my way to an appointment, my brain already created this little movie in my mind of what it looks like to go to Starbucks. There's no line, right? Pulling up to the takeout window, getting my Starbucks and being on my way. And then when I get there and there is a line, my expectations not met immediately. Oh my God, do I have time? Do I have time to be here? Now I'm frustrated because of that expectation. So expectations get created in our minds all the time. With the covert contract, some of the examples are, and I'll say these are the intangible ones, which is I'll always be there for you. I'll be boundaryless, right? So that you'll never leave me. I'm doing that not maybe because I want to, but because I believe that if I do it, you're kind of obligated to stay with me. You'll not leave me. I perform a service for you, or I have a purpose. I'll overgive so you'll finally appreciate me. Oh, wow, that one. That one, the the real pitfall of that one is that in the overgiving, we teach people, we think, look at all we did, and I'm giving this to you. But the other person, that's their reality because you always do that. They don't experience the how big that is for you and how that's a demonstration of your love. This is just what you do. So the more you do it, the more you teach them this is just what you do, and they think that you're doing it because you want to. So they don't recognize it as the big thing that you do, and then you don't get what you want back, right? Which is this great amount of appreciation. So then you go out and do even bigger and more things. And then you feel underappreciated and resentful. I'll give the peace. I'll be the person who creates peace so that you'll love me. So I won't argue anything. I won't set any boundaries. I will always just go with the flow. And if I do that, there'll never be any reason for you to be upset with me, leave me, any of that. I got a tickle. And then you end up saying things, or if we're on the receiving end of a covert contract, you can hear things like, after everything I've done for you. Um, those resentments build. Um, so what we don't do, and this is the part that this is all an inside job, right? We have to do this where if we're going to do for something for someone, to just maybe stop a minute and ask ourselves, what am I expecting in return? What am I expecting? What are my expectations? And If they're kind of intangible expectations, they're just on our part, we can work on like, okay, am I willing to do this thing that I want to do and let go of those expectations? So I'm just doing them because out of love and I'm not expecting anything back. Or if I can't do that, then maybe I really don't want to do this. I'm doing it just to get something back and doing our work first. If it's something that's more relevant and tangible, like maybe you're going to go into business with someone or you're you're the one planning a event where there's really real things happening. When you sit and think about, I'm doing this because I have an expectation. Let me give you a good example. Let's say somebody that you know and love, maybe a family member or a friend, is down on their luck and they just need someplace to live for a few months to get back on their feet. So you want to be that person to help them. And in your mind, you think, oh, that would be great. And you know what? They could help around the house. They could do some light chores. Maybe they could watch the kids for me sometimes, or they could take care of my animals when I'm away, whatever it is, right? But we're afraid of confrontation, right? We're afraid to verbalize our needs and wants. So we don't tell them that the way we see it playing out is, yeah, you can have this room and stay with me. Does it work for you in exchange for that room to do these things? We don't say that. We just go, yeah, of course. And then we have these expectations that we may not verbalize at all. And we see their dirty glass in the sink, or they didn't offer to help, and we start to get angry. And what kind of person stays at someone's house and doesn't do XYZ? But we never told them what our expectation was. And they may be so in their own head about the position they're in and how to get out of it, and that they may not even realize. They may not have ever learned these things. They may be a messy person in their own life. They're not going to magically become a clean freak because they're living with you. We have to then say to them ahead of time, I will give you this opportunity. I will share this. But here are my expectations, right? Here is how this would work energetically, be balanced. You can have this room in exchange for help out with the kids, help out the house. But then that's not making us feel like such the good person, the savior that comes in, right? Because we're balancing things. And we like when we hold power as being the giver, where we always have one on everybody else. We've given more than everybody else. Balance is not always something that we're looking for. Does that ring true for some of you? And with either for yourself or what you've experienced with others? Yeah, those expectations. Yep. All right. Pitfall number 4. And it's pretty much what we just covered. So it's projecting expectations onto others. So instead of communicating these needs, empaths and codependents often assume others value what you value. They expect others to show love in the same way that we do. We believe that the level of care we give to others should be reciprocated automatically without us setting any kind of boundaries anywhere. So we can tell ourselves stories like, I would never do that to someone I love, so they shouldn't either. I always check in on people. Why don't they check in on me? Like we see ourselves almost as a perfect example of love. And then we project it onto other people. And if they don't show their love in the same way or appreciation, then we judge that. I've had friends that I've lost over the years, and it saddens me, but I know that I've lost them because of some things they shared before the loss, because I just did not have the same level of time and bandwidth to be available to them in the way that they wanted in order to feel valued and like I was invested in the friendship. And and that sucks, you know? Because I really did love them, but if they have the ability in their life to see their friend once a week for coffee or talk on the phone more often, if you if you can't do that, right? Well, and then they want to leave that relationship, that's their choice. But I would say that there's also an expectation there, right? And that expectation is what destroyed the friendship, because if you want to be around someone more because you enjoy them, but you can't get that because of something in the other person's life, then that's an expectation that gets unmet. And now you've chosen to walk away entirely because it's just not comfortable to sit in the feeling where that expectation is not going to be met, and maybe changing the expectation to compassion that, somebody's really busy right now. And I totally get that. I'm their friend. I'm excited for them. I understand. And and I know that they do show up when they can. And so, and look, either that's enough or it's not. And if it's not, I guess that's okay too. But sometimes it's just the expectation and the projection of, if I'm available, they should be available, right? If I do this, then everyone else should do this too. Okay, moving on. Pitfall number 5, over responsibility for emotions. So a lot of times we believe that if someone is upset, it must be our fault. If someone is struggling, I should fix it. And if someone we love and care about is unhappy, we failed somehow. Boy, this is really big with parents of adult children, right? Or even children. We take on these responsibilities. And what's crazy is that we think that that's love, but actually what can happen is that other people then stop sharing some more real aspects of what they're going through, because it then becomes about us and our and they end up starting to manage our expectations of our ability to influence their life. So staying in our own lane is really important. And I'll just say this about the parents of adult children, or even children, is that when we step in and try to manage all of their emotional states, when we step in and try to shield them from any kind of disappointment or consequences. There is an unspoken message that says, you can't handle it. I don't believe that you can get through this. And then they start to believe that themselves. And what happens is we get the exact opposite of what we wanted. We don't get these resilient kids who grow up grounded and stable. The more we remove any kind of pain, suffering, consequences, or obstacles that they have to forge resilience around, the more neurotic and anxious and depressed that they become. Okay. So, pitfall number 6, ignoring red flags because you understand, because you have compassion for the person's experience or story, right? Empaths are amazing at seeing the wounded child in others. The problem is that this can lead to excusing their bad behavior, staying in a toxic relation because you understand their trauma, believing that just more, all you need is some more love, more love, more love will heal them, that we will heal them instead of what really has to happen, which is they heal themselves. And tolerating more than you should. And I want you to think about this. Here's the kicker is that the more we tolerate bad behavior, the more we show up boundaryless, the more we feed that person's unbalanced view and validate their demands and expectations. So think about that. Someone's bad behavior gets reinforced by our tolerance of it, our lack of consequences to them for it, and our inability to set boundaries. It validates their warped view and their unhealthy actions. Because it's like an agreement, like we're agreeing. So we're not doing them any favors either, is the point. Understanding someone's pain doesn't mean you should accept their behavior. Pitfall number 7. Okay, just checking the time. Pitfall number 7, losing yourself in relationships. Common experiences in losing yourself in relationships, shaping yourself around someone else's needs. In my family, we call this being a molder. Do you ever have people you know who, depending on who they're dating, start aligning with every aspect of that new partner, right? Suddenly they're into motocross, right? Suddenly they're uh, watching football, or they're into going to expensive restaurants that they never did before, or listening to music they never, or wearing clothes that matches their. So, yeah, shaping yourself around the needs of another, forgetting what you want, completely losing yourself again, giving yourself away, I call it. You give yourself away to the relationship, feeling empty and resentful over time, and This is a really big one. Not knowing who you are outside of helping. Not knowing who you are outside of helping. So, just to kind of reframe this a little bit, none of these are character flaws. They're intelligent adaptations from growing up in chaos. Remember, they kept you safe. We just need to update them. So, empathy without boundaries becomes exhaustion. Compassion without communication becomes resentment. And love without self respect becomes self abandonment. These are this whole
Could you
idea.
repeat those again,
Uh,
please?
Empathy without boundaries becomes exhaustion. Compassion without communication becomes resentment. And love without self respect becomes self abandonment because we're boundaryless. I think I'm going to stop here and do a part two because there's so much more to share. And I don't want to melt your brains. So, the first part to be able to fix anything is to become aware of it. So, this is your invitation to become aware, to own the things that you feel like you have to defend, and to neutralize them in that way. And to start becoming curious about what do I think? What do I feel about this when we start going into everybody else? And you know what's interesting is that one of the ways that this is described is as being overly self-focused, which seems like it might be the opposite of what we've been talking about because we've been talking about how we're so focused on others. But our focus on others is because we're so self focused on us. We think that everyone's thinking about us, that we are godlike in our ability to manage and control the world around us. We are overly self focused. But we have to change that into growing into knowing ourselves so that that self focus is not sent outward to fulfill an expectation, but built inward so that we're clear and congruent. Congruent means we mean what we say what we mean, we're communicative, our facial expressions match the words coming out of our mouths. We don't use sarcasm or passive aggressive behaviors to influence others. We're clear and we're congruent. Does anybody have any questions or even any stories that you wanted to share? My processing face again. Uh, you're
Just
welcome.
just so much of this resonated with me, and I'm very grateful that you were doing this one today. A lot came up for me, and I look forward to the second part.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part, Jane. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, if anything comes up, any questions that anybody has, um, feel free to email me. My email address is on the path, C as in cat, H as in Harry, T as in Tom, CHT@gmail.com. I know from my personal experience that all of these things are what there was no way that I was going to be able to be successful in any aspect of my life, whether it was relationships or in my purpose or in any area while I was still operating under these systems. So it's when I work with people, these things always come up, these underlying operating systems. And when they come, what exists in the dark cannot survive the light. Once you bring these things in from your subconscious, unconscious into your conscious awareness, now you can start to shape this behavior. And just listening to this or being here today can make a lot of sense and have aha moments, but it doesn't necessarily lead to change. Change is taking action. So if you wanted to explore more ways that you can take action and need more support than a general group setting, you can reach out to me again with that email address, and we can book a discovery call and talk about how we could possibly get you where you want to go. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up. And I really do look forward to part two. All right. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you soon.